For more, let's go to Cape Town. Leonard Mbulle-Nziege is researcher at the Institute for Democracy, Citizenship and Public Policy at the University of Cape Town. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
Thank you for having me.
We're seeing events unfolding, and each day brings its surprises. There was on Wednesday the coup, on Thursday the displaying on state television of members of the Bongo family, and then the head of the opposition who ran, speaking out on various media, including France 24. Your thought of some first on his accusation that this is all a family affair, what we're witnessing.
Yes, it's very interesting to hear these allegations made by Professor Albert Ondo, how, as we know, according to the election results, finished second and has called for a rerun of the elections in the wake of this coup. But nevertheless, the Gabonese political establishment, as we know, for almost 60 years has been the fiefdom of the Bongo family. So all political matters had been run through them. And before Ali Bongo had come to power, his elder sister, Pascaline Bongo, was actually tipped as the heir apparent to their late father, Omar Bongo. She had served as the director of cabinet, and the director of cabinet within the Gabonese polity is some sort of a vice president, unofficial vice president, because the personalized nature of that presidency ensures that that person with that position has closest ties to and access to the president. So he accuses her of having ties with the coup leaders. And as we know, General Nguema is a cousin to the Bongos. So it's interesting to note that it could be an inside job more than what we had initially been made aware of.
Yeah, and now the focus is switching to Ali Bongo's son.
Yes, Nuruddin Valentin Bongo. He is his London-educated eldest son. He had worked in the private sector before being appointed in 2019 as the Director of Presidential Affairs. He was appointed at a time when when Ali Bongo was recovering from a stroke that he had suffered in Saudi Arabia in October 2018, and that had kept him away from public light and from being able to perform his presidential duties on a day-to-day basis. So Bongo's Jr., that is Valentin Nureddin, essentially became his eyes on the ground, and he was appointed at a time when there was factionalism within the ruling establishment. There was Bongo's former director of cabinet, Brice Oligui Nguema, who had been making a power grab during that period in time, and it was seemingly that Valentin was brought in to put things in order and ensure that the people within the Bongo family who support the Bongo family would be able to reassert their control during a time of great uncertainty.
General Nguema, who on Thursday announced the temporary reinstatement of the Constitutional Council, this ahead of a Monday swearing in for him as leader. A temporary reinstatement. Your thoughts on that?
It's quite interesting because the president of the Constitutional Court is actually Ali Bongo's stepmother, Marie-Madeleine Boranso. She had two children with the former president, Omar Bongo. So you can see how deep-seated the family politics is in the Gabonese political setup. But then I think what the step he has taken to reinstate the Constitutional Court is just to add institutional legitimacy, so that if he can, if there's an argument per se that his coming to power is illegal, he can use that as some sort of source of legitimacy going forward.
Leonard Mbulle-Nziege, when you saw the celebrations in the streets on Wednesday, what were your thoughts?
I wasn't surprised, because if you look at research put out by the Afrobarometer Research Network, they undertook a survey between 2021 to 2022, and almost 90% of Gabonese had stipulated that they weren't happy with the direction in which the country was going. In that same poll, between 80 to 90% of Gabonese had also stipulated that they believed public officials, as well as officials in the private sector, were corrupt. So there was a general there was general grievances against the ruling class. Therefore, the protests, or should I say the celebrations that we saw after the overthrow of President Bongo, they weren't a surprise at all.
They weren't a surprise, and yet now what we're describing is the reaction of the opposition, which is that this is just one Bongo clan that could be replacing another. What are reactions more broadly in the region? I'm thinking of places like Congo and Cameroon. What are people going to think there?
Well, in Cameroon, which is my home country, a statement was put out by the government expressing their concern regarding the situation. But the thing about these countries, particularly in the Central African region, countries that belong to the CEMAC and Economic Community and Central African states, they don't really have the tradition of interfering in their neighboring states' affairs. Denis Sassou Nguesso actually is a relative he's related to the Bongos. His late daughter, was married to late President Omar Bongo. So he is looking at that more on a personal level. But then I think that in the terms of the regional powers, it's more or less life goes on. Obviously, they're going to be more vigilant because they are also long-standing regimes. So we might see them undertake certain reforms. We might see them, introduce certain sorts of political liberalization, or they might decide to tighten their political systems. But then within the sub-regional context, there isn't much going on in that sense in terms of reactions.
And what about among ordinary citizens?
Well, I have a close Gabonese friend who's a researcher, and he says that, the euphoria of, Bongo's overthrow has kind of diminished because, as you noted, it's a palace coup. It's a situation entre eux. They had their intrigues, they had their disputes amongst themselves, and now the question is, what is next? What's interesting is that I think that the current coup reminds me not of what happened in a Francophone country, but in Zimbabwe in 2017, whereby you had the close affiliates of Robert Mugabe. One faction decided to overthrow Mugabe. They preserved his life, and then they promised to undertake reforms, but then rather they decided to replicate the status quo in order to maintain power. So, there are fears that something of that sort could occur in Gabon, because the opposition has been completely sidelined at this point in time. There hasn't been any talk of a period of transition. And as we've seen, by the reinstitution of the Constitutional Court, General Nguema is trying to add legal legitimacy to him being sworn in as the leader.
And what about where you are in South Africa? Is the talk more about what's happening inside Gabon, what we've been talking about in this discussion, or is it more about, hey, what's going on in France's former colonies?
It's the latter. Most people aren't very versed with what's going on in Gabon in particular, but then I get friends, colleagues, and people who reach out to me on social media, look at my work, and is like, but what's up with Francophone West and Central Africa? Is it a rise against France? What is going on? And I said, it's a mixture of factors. All of these countries have their different peculiarities. They have their different political and historical trajectories. But what you can see in general is that domestically in each of these countries, there is anger and there's significant grievances against the manner in which the countries are being governed. There's high levels of corruption. The democratic systems have been manipulated by the leaders. And we've seen that in rigged elections. We've seen that in presidents undertaking third presidential terms. And in addition to that, we see the security situations whereby leaders who have derived their legitimacy largely from external partners like France have been unable to address the deteriorating security situation in some of those countries. So it's a reckoning of times in that part of the world. A lot of the issues are structural and they're domestic oriented, but then I think that international partners like France, who have had long-standing influence in those countries, also need to look at themselves in the mirror and say to themselves, what is our role in this wave of coups that are occurring now in West Central Africa?
Leonard Mbulle-Nziege, many thanks for speaking with us here on France 24.
Thank you for having me.